It's often complained about that certain mechanics in Path of Exile aren't intuitive, that they're hard to understand and get into without some big brain nerd telling us what to think about it all a week later on the YouTubes. This is particularly true of things like the Atlas rework or new League mechanics, and honestly, while the current Atlas rework is significantly better than the old system, the reality is nothing in this fucking game is intuitive whatsoever. There's no way anyone would know how seemingly basic mechanics like accuracy, armor, evasion, or leech would work without resorting to Google to actually figure any of it out. If someone looked at their defense sheet and saw 50% estimated physical damage reduction, they'd be forgiven for thinking that they should get at least close to that number when fighting enemies, but nope, it means basically nothing without context, and the context is armor rating, damage taken, the type that damage is, and then knowing how armor rating actually works in the first place. Which, like many games, is a formula discovered by standing in a pentagram, speaking in tongues for a good 5 hours, and then hoping whatever dark god you've just summoned doesn't rend your flesh in twain. Now, you might think, is there a tutorial of some sort? Of course there is, but this tutorial is effectively the bare minimum of what one might expect. It tells you how to pick up items, move around, and how the skill gems work. Kind of. That's about it. The rest can be found as you play via an in-game help guide, and if you're thinking this is going to be more helpful, then think again, because of course it fucking isn't. Who thinks this is a useful fucking piece of advice? Ah yes, armor and evasion protect you in different ways. And what the fuck is an energy shield? The only useful information here is resistances, since it doesn't require as much context and because it's actually explained on the same page. But there's nothing on either this page or in the help guide entirely about the differences between armor, evasion and energy shield and why you'd pick one versus the rest. Might I add, this is one of the first pages new players would be prompted to read through, and effectively nothing is explained whatsoever. Amazing. 10 out of fucking 10. None of Path of Exile's mechanics are explained in-game. They just kind of expect you to figure it out for yourself. This sort of experimentation and exploratory gameplay made sense 30 years ago when gaming was still relatively fresh and when kids didn't have Netflix or easy access to porn, especially for ARPGs like Path of Exile, but it's been 20 years since then. The market has grown exponentially and Path of Exile kind of stopped marketing themselves as the hardcore ARPG a good 5 years ago now. But hey, it's not all that surprising given that so many modern games fail to reliably do this themselves. Even Minecraft never really added a proper tutorial. The in-game achievements and pop-up hints are the lazy-ass method they hacked together to do the job instead. An interface most people probably ignore for how useless it is. The only other help system, if you could call it that, is the recipe book, which only tells you recipes for the materials you actually have in your inventory. Imagine if all recipe books worked like that. How many of you have read a recipe or watched a cooking show and thought, hey, I'd like to try that, I'll just go down to the supermarket and get the ingredients. Okay, now imagine you're watching Gordon fucking Ramsay and he's like, what? You don't have the ingredients? Fuck off, pleb! You don't already have half a pound of saffron or caviar in your pantry already? Fucking get good, scrub! Minecraft got away with it for how universally ubiquitous it is, but Path of Exile isn't, and Trial and Error isn't actually all that fun in Path of Exile because it often takes new players forever to figure out they've fucked up. Veteran players like to think, oh, it only takes 5 to 10 hours to get to maps, but not if you're a fucking new player. Those guys take shit slow. They absorb the world and the story. They read the fucking quest text to figure out where to go, since they don't know. And then, when they're stuck, some random asshole online just tells them, your build's fucking shit. Go read this random guide with a wall of text you don't understand and then copy it into POB. And they're thinking, what the fuck's a POB and is it contagious? Basically, they gotta do this shit all over again. Warframe is well known for having a steep as fuck learning curve. But at least you don't have to effectively nuke your character from existence 15 hours in after you realized investing so much credits into damaged mods was a really fucking terrible idea. Sure, you'll still want to gouge your fucking eyes out, but hey, it could be worse. You could be learning leech mechanics in Path of Exile. Absolutely none of this game is intuitive whatsoever. Sure, it's nice that people know what they're getting into less than 5 minutes in when the game forces them to see the complete clusterfuck that is the passive tree, but seeing it is not explaining it, and it's a pretty hard ask to demand people to experiment and research for a few dozen hours before they get the hang of things. The only people I've ever seen who actually like games that don't hold your hand are veterans who don't need tutorials to begin with. But if you've got no idea what the fuck you're doing, then you're gonna hope someone's gonna come and hold your hand because nobody else is fucking coming to help you. Games like RimWorld and Dwarf Fortress don't hold your hand. They're punishing, unforgiving games where losing is fun. The difference between those games and Path of Exile is not only will you tend to lose early and often while figuring shit out, which makes getting back into the gist relatively quick and easy, but you'll also usually have a super fun story to tell your mates after it happened. Like, for instance, the time my pawns got their ass beat by a deer only 30 minutes after I finished RimWorld's tutorial. Now, RimWorld's tutorial is, like Path of Exile's, really fucking shallow, but it gets the job done, I guess. You learn how to build walls, make sandbags, and pump a bandit or two full of hot lead. All important information. Only in this case, the bandit was the ex-husband of one of my colonists, and I didn't know how to bury people. Turns out leaving dead corpses rotting in the front yard is a super easy way to drop morale. Who would have guessed? Especially if the body happens to be your ex-husband who you apparently still had feelings for. The tutorial doesn't really mention things like graves and shit, doesn't even really mention happiness all that much, so naturally why wouldn't I just leave it there to rot? What else am I gonna do? Eventually, the mental anguish of the suffering colonist was so bad she had numerous psychotic breakouts, which pretty much involved her going around and violently attacking the first thing she came into contact with, which, in this case, was the chef. And then, after he was brutally stabbed by the wandering psychotic widow, a motherfucking rampaging deer decided to join the show because fuck it, why not, right? So the chef, who was already trying to deal with a stab wound, now has to deal with being fucking gored by a deer. And since none of my colonists were particularly good medics, all they could be done was bandage him up with the shitty herbal medicine they had and put him to bed, so that he could eventually bleed out and die. The problem, of course, was that I only actually had one functioning colonist at this point, and that colonist, despite valiantly murdering the fuck out of that deer, also got gored to shit and ended up in bed. So now we have a bruised up widow roaming the wasteland and two maimed colonists hoping not to bleed out by the end of the night. So all of a sudden, once the widow finally managed to off herself, the mysterious stranger shows up. An event where the game's basically telling you that you suck. So here's some help. Great, I figured. He gets added as a new colonist and he's an actual medic. Unfortunately, he was way too fucking late, and one by one my colonists all bled out and died. And as the last one heaved their final painful breath, the pet bear she had bonded with, since, yes, that's a thing, went complete and utter apeshit at the loss of his bonded master, and proceeded to go man-eater mode on the one and only person left in this god-forsaken colony, the fucking stranger. And all I could do was watch as the poor fuck bled out on the floor alongside the bear he tried very unsuccessfully to fight off. 30 minutes after the tutorial, and that's my fucking story. Path of Exile, on the other hand, will waste a new player's time for upwards of 10 hours, and all they've got to say at the end of it was, "My passive tree looks like a fucking crab." Well, folks, that's going to be it for me today. As always, if you enjoyed what you see, smash the shit out of the like and subscribe button, and I'll see you next time. Thank you very much for watching.